In this video, I want to introduce you to the Bohr model for drawing atoms. This is probably the most common model you see in introductory chemistry courses, and particularly I want to talk about how electrons are arranged in the Bohr model. So remember that our atoms are built from 3 subatomic particles. We have 2 that are found in the nucleus, and together they just get called nucleons. And that's our proton with a positive charge. And protons, remember, determine the identity of the atom, what the atom is, what particular element it is. And protons are also counted when we want to calculate the mass, and we take a look at them when we're considering the charge. And the other nucleon is the neutron, which has no charge, but it also contributes to the mass and the stability of the atom. And then the other subatomic particle, the electron, has a negative charge and contributes then to the total charge of the atom, whether it's a neutral atom or an ion. The electron is found somewhere outside the nucleus, and it is held to the nucleus or attracted to the nucleus by electrostatic forces. It is negative, the protons are positive, and those opposite forces attract. Electrons also are important because they are what move in chemical reactions. They allow chemical bonds to form so that we can make new compounds, or the electrons can, when they move, they could also break a chemical bond to cause a reactant to turn into something different when you have a product. Now, when it comes to showing an atom, we have to use a model. And we use lots of models in science because models illustrate something that is complicated. It has a lot of parts, or it is extremely small, or it is very large. And in order to help us understand it, to make it easier for us to understand, we create a model. No model is perfect. They all have their limitations, but some certainly are better than others. The Bohr's model of the atom is the one that is typically used for drawing atoms in chemistry. It is not this picture over here on the right. Bohr's model is most useful for small atoms, though. It's used to show what the atoms that have an atomic number less than 20, so from hydrogen to calcium, is where it becomes most useful. Just looking at this particular model, which is not a good model, it gives you the impression that all of your electrons are kind of at the same distance from the nucleus. You kind of can draw a dotted line here around, or draw a line around here. So that's where the electrons, the outermost level, if we try to make this shape three-dimensional. And there are 3 electrons there. And so that is definitely not what we're finding in any experimental results. It's sort of a common picture of the atom, but it's, it has a nucleus in the middle and electrons around the outside, and that's about all we can say for it. So Bohr's model of the atom has several assumptions about it on how the atom works. The first one is that the electrons orbit the nucleus. They go around the nucleus at a particular distance. And so if you look at the model over here for bromine using the Bohr model, you can see these circles that sort of expand out from the nucleus with the electrons in them. And so those are particular distances. Orbits that are closer to the nucleus have a lower energy level, so we talk about these orbits in terms of their energy level. And the ones that are far away from the nucleus have a higher energy level. The energy levels are also called electron shells because it's kind of this idea of layers of electrons, kind of like an onion around the center of the nucleus. Another important assumption of the Bohr's model is that each energy level can only hold a particular number of electrons. So that first energy level here, closest to the nucleus, can only hold 2 electrons. The next level out can only hold 8. Electrons, though, can move between energy levels, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the emission spectra. But they are able to move because they can absorb energy, and that makes them a higher energy electron, so they could move out an energy level. But they don't want to stay there, and so by releasing energy, they move back down to wherever they started, and that's where we see light being emitted. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So to draw a Bohr model, you have a couple steps. The first thing is to find your atom on the periodic table. Periodic tables are here's your helper, your cheat sheet here in chemistry. Each row or period of the periodic table then represents an energy level. So the very top level with hydrogen and helium is energy level 1. And if you count the rows, you see we have 7 rows, so there's 7 potential energy levels. Each box on the periodic table, going in order 1, 2, 3, represents an atom with 1 more electron at a particular energy level. So again, starting at the top, hydrogen has 1 atom in that first energy level, and then you go over to the other side for helium, which are 1 electron in that energy level. You go over to helium, you have 2 electrons in that first energy level. So to figure out the Bohr model, you want to count the electrons on each energy level, 1 row at a time, until you reach whatever atom you are trying to draw a model for. And then you place those electrons on the appropriate energy level on your model. Typically, we also write the number of protons or protons and neutrons inside the nucleus of that Bohr model. And so you can use your periodic table to figure out how many electrons you need to put on each of those energy levels. Here's a periodic table that has been extracted for those first 20 elements, showing the energy levels. And then we have an exact example of a Bohr model over here. So as you see, if you can look at this this small writing to look at hydrogen. Hydrogen has 1 electron, and so it would show 1 energy level. And these boxes aren't showing the full circles just so we can see it. But if we go down here to potassium, which is what the illustration is over on the right corner, so potassium has 4 energy levels because we count our rows going down. So we've gotten to the 4th row. And in those 4 energy levels, then the first row is going to have as many electrons as we see in this first row on the table. So there's 2 electrons, and so we see our 2 electrons in our first energy level written over here in our diagram, in our model. And then the second energy level, if you count all the electrons going across in the second energy level, you see there are 8 electrons, and so we've drawn 8 electrons arranged around in the second energy level. Sometimes you see the electrons evenly spaced, and sometimes they're grouped in pairs. Either way is fine. Later on we'll be talking about why the electrons are in pairs and how important that is for chemical bonds, but you can also draw them evenly spaced. And then, of course, we're still trying to make our way to potassium, which is down here in the 4th energy level. So we have to go through the 3rd energy level. That's another 8 electrons. And then we end up on potassium with 1 electron in the 4th energy level, 1 electron hanging out over here. Incidentally, that last electron level, that highest electron level, those electrons are known as valence electrons. Again, we will hear about them more when we're talking about chemical bonds, but I'll just mention it now. So you're going to get some time to practice drawing Bohr's model on a worksheet. Use your periodic table to do it. I think you'll find it is a fairly simple process. You just need to keep track of how many energy levels you're going through to find your particular atom, and then count across how many electrons are found in that energy level using your periodic table as a resource.